We are in leadership and education. We're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm opening up kind of with the idea of educational leadership, right? When we talk about educational leadership, the same tenets of effective leadership apply, right? Leaders are leaders, right? Whether it's in an educational environment or elsewhere. And what I guess the concept or the idea here is that from your own experience, right? You likely aren't going to put yourself in a position where you stick around, or even if you have to, that you're going to follow a bad leader. And we're going to talk a little bit about what good leaders look like, okay? But from my experience, and I'm sure that you share this as well, the better the leader, the more willing someone is to follow them. So I want to pause for a minute. I always like to ask this question because leadership can sometimes be confused based on the type of person that the leader is. So I want to ask you a question. I want to get you thinking right here from the get-go, okay? And you can put a check mark on here or a sticky note that says yes, or you can put an X on here and a sticky note that says no. But this is my question, okay? Was Adolf Hitler an effective leader? You can unmute and say yes or no if you want to, because I know some of you are in a position, right? But when we look at leader, okay, Adolf Hitler, when it comes to being a leader, was he a good leader or a bad leader? An effective leader, an ineffective leader? Anybody have any comments?
I I'm not always certain that a good leader is the same as an effective leader. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'd shrink from saying he was a good leader, but effective in causing some effects that he wanted. Yes.
Let me ask you this. Is there a difference between being a good leader and a good person?
Mm.
Right? Or maybe the more specific question to ask is, can somebody be a good leader and a bad person? So while you're mentally chewing on that, this is one of the points that I want to make. Okay, if you look at the last line, right? The better the leader, the more willing someone is to follow them, right? Whether the cause is good or bad, okay? What makes someone a leader is other people's willingness to follow them, their ability to communicate and connect with that person, regardless of the cause. We're not talking about a good or bad cause. That's kind of cut and dry. We're talking about a good or bad leader. And in the example of Hitler, he was extremely effective at getting people to follow him to some pretty nasty extremes. Okay, so when I ask, can somebody be a good leader and a bad person? He's a great example. He's a great example. Extremely good at leading, extremely bad at what it was he was leading them to. Okay. Um, the reason that I like to point this out is because if we have people that are willing to follow us, we have to make sure that we're leading them to a good place. Okay. So we understand that people are going to follow leaders. Okay. Or effective leaders are those that get people to follow them. So if people are going to follow effective leaders, authentic leaders, students are going to follow an authentic teacher, right? A teacher that's leading students, not just managing students. What does it mean to manage students? It means to respond to them exactly where they are, right? We meet them where they are, but then we stay there with them. We manage them in their current situation. To lead students is to meet them where they are, but then to lead them into a place that they wouldn't have otherwise gone. Okay. So we don't want to just manage them. We want to lead them. Think back to someone that you knew who was an excellent leader. What are some of the qualities that they possessed? We're going to get to qualities in a minute. But think about an effective leader, somebody that's impacted you. What qualities did they possess? Honest, dependable, vision casting. I love it. Positive and patient. Absolutely. Absolutely. Clear, consistent, right? We all have somebody that's been an excellent leader in our life, and hopefully they were leading us to a place that was encouraging us, right? Motivating us. Fantastic, flexible. It's beautiful. Yes. We've all been impacted by excellent leaders, and these are all qualities of them. And we're going to look at some specific qualities here in just a minute. As we go to slide 5, as educators, people that work with students on a day-to-day basis, have you ever found yourself thinking some of these questions, right? Is good student management enough? Okay, no wrong answer, right? But sometimes we wonder, right? Can I just get away with managing students? Is it okay to just manage them so, so they don't kill one another, right? Can I just manage them so they just get through the school year? Can we just manage them right to get them to that end goal of graduation, right? Is that enough? Or maybe you've thought this question before: why don't set procedures work for certain kids? I would imagine that's a pretty applicable question that is asked when you're working with certain populations of students. For those of you that might be new to teaching, right? Why are current processes failing me? Okay. Or to some of you that have been teaching for a long time and you've done things the same way for years and now it's just not working, right? Why are current processes failing me? And then the final question: if I'm good at teaching, why is it not preventing disruptions and distractions? Wow, it's tough to say. It's a tough question to answer. It's also a tough question to read, right? If I'm good at teaching, why is it not preventing disruptions and distractions? These are questions that I think all of us think from time to time, regardless of how effective we are in the classroom, regardless of how effective we are as leaders. These are questions that can creep in from time to time. So let's compare two different things here on slide 6. Okay. Ineffective leadership and effective leadership. I'm on slide 6. Ineffective leadership is comprised of rigid management, right? I think management is one of the key words there that gets us in trouble, right? But it's an attempt to manage people, not lead them, but manage them in a rigid way. In addition, unmoving processes and procedures, right? Things that are set in stone. We are going to do it and we're going to do it this way, and there is no plan B. And then focused on just grades. I have talked to a lot of teachers, you may be able to relate to this, that when we were looking at standards of learning, SOLs, I don't know what they're called in California. We call them SOLs, standards of learnings, right? That we're teaching people to the test, right? You teach to the test, you don't teach to the curriculum, you teach to the test, right? It's focused just on outcomes. And we could dive into a rabbit hole on that topic that could comprise a completely separate training, okay? But if you think about it, if you're focused on just grades, that is going to make it extremely difficult to lead students that aren't, okay? So those are just 3 elements of ineffective leadership. Anyone else care to add one? Ineffective leadership, as you have experienced it. Anybody care to add here? You can unmute, put it in the chat, or sticky note it. Ineffective leadership.
Lack of communication, like just expecting things without communicating them.
Oh, uncommunicated expectations are a recipe for failure, aren't they? And we also talked about vision casting, right? As one of the signs that was a part of a good leader. I think somebody put that, casting a clear vision. Man, if there's no communication, there certainly is no vision casting, right? So that's a great example. Anybody else? Throw a sticky note in there, or you can comment in the chat. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move over to effective leadership. Okay, ineffective leadership, man, we can probably come up with more examples of that, unfortunately, than we can effective leadership. But as we transition our focus to effective leadership, there is a structured feel. Think back to a classroom that you've been in, right? Where the teacher was really effective at leading, right? There is a feel that you get when you walk into that classroom, right? It's whether it's the way that things are, it's how it looks. There's an environment. We talk so much in past trainings about engaging environments and the Maslow versus Bloom conversation. There's just this feel of safety. It's a structured, almost family feel, right, that effective leaders create because they understand the value and importance of your environment. In addition, flexibility, right? Casting a vision is important, but sticking die hard to that vision when everything is screaming, we need to adjust. Effective leaders adjust. They're flexible, right? They recognize that there are areas that can always be improved. And when they get to a position where they can improve it, they're flexible and they act on that. And then finally, checking in when grades slip, right? Not just focusing on the grades, but what is it that might be behind a change in grades? Is there something that might be impacting this student that I can help them with? I can support them through. Maybe I can lead them from. So effective leadership is checking in when grades slip, focusing not just on the grades, but the one that you're grading as well. So we're going to transition to slide 7. There is an educational leadership formula based on the work of Michael Bloss. And this is his statement. Rules without relationships equals rebellion. Relationships without rules equals chaos. But a balance of relationships and rules gives us results. And these are results that incorporate growth and success and students achieving maximum value from their time, either in the classroom or their time under your charge. Okay. So relationships plus rules is the formula, right? That is going to produce the best results. I have been in a classroom where it was all about rules without any consideration to relationships at all. And this is not a stereotypical statement, but what I will say is that a lot of times you will see this type of leadership in a brand new teacher. Okay, one that's really trying to establish themselves. It's all about the rules. It's all about the structure. I have to make sure I take charge, that they know that I'm the head of the classroom, right? And I can't let them even get a little bit out of hand because it'll become a tidal wave. Okay. And these are people that are very inflexible, and we know what happens, right? Especially with kids that are a little bit on the oppositional side. They're going to test, they're going to push, and with no consideration to relationships, you're going to get rebellion. Okay. Then there's the other end of that extreme, the other end of the extreme, right? Relationships and no rules. Okay. And I like to think of these as the substitute teachers. right? They come in, they really want to connect with the kids, they want to be their friends, they know they aren't the primary teacher, they're there for a short period of time, right? And it's all about relationships and not doing anything that's going to rock the proverbial vote. And inevitably, okay, this is a recipe for chaos. But when we find that balance of relationships and rules, right, that's the sweet spot. That's where we get results. So we're going to transition to slide 8. These are all of the key qualities that have been identified for effective leaders in education. And there are a number of them here. There are some of these that we might be more adept at than others, right? We've actually narrowed in on a few of these, or I should say, y'all have in your responses. I know we talked about communication. I know we talked about strategy and vision casting, right? I know that we've talked about flexibility, being creative, even focusing on certain things, right? So these are qualities that we're all aware of, right? But in some combination, these are what make up effective leaders in education. Is there one particular quality that you would say you are really, really good at, or you feel that you have some well-developed skills in those areas? If there is, you can touch on your little pin here and just kind of put a check mark in the box, right? Is there a quality that you feel like you do really well, right? Good communicator. Okay. Absolutely. Anybody else? Empathy. It's beautiful. So important. Good communicator. Okay. I'm an empath by nature. Adaptability and flexibility. That's fantastic. Anybody else? Anybody innovative? Collaborative. Great. Self-motivation. That is so important. And I know that's an area where I've struggled from time to time, right? I can motivate myself, but it gets to a point where you're trying to motivate yourself while you're trying to motivate everybody else, and we really have to be aware because that can start some of the stages of burnout. But self-motivation is extremely important. Do we have any MacGyvers in this group? Anybody that's innovative, right? That's just so creative and innovate. You're just, creating almost lesson plans out of thin air. I know that I've worked with some teachers that just amaze me at their creativity. This is fantastic. So, key qualities for leaders. Is there anybody that would see an area where they would really like to focus on growing their skill set? I know for me, it would actually be here in this innovation, right? That's my X right there. I would really like to grow my innovation and maybe even my creativity. There are always areas where we can improve our skill set and become better. Cultural intelligence is a really, really good one. I would imagine, especially with some of the students that y'all work with, cultural intelligence would be an area where we can just that really deals with being empathic, but adding that cultural filter there, right? It's hard for us to step into someone else's shoes if we don't understand the culture that helped them develop those shoes and those mindsets, right? And even those biases and those assumptions that we can have. So that's fantastic. So we're going to go to slide 9. Okay. Some of those competencies, right? You said, I want to develop some of these competencies. Well, here are some leadership competencies, right? And how to develop them. If there are competencies that you're wanting to become better at, then these are some ways that we can achieve that goal. Number 1 is reflection, right? Reflect on what it is that you're good at. What skill sets do you really feel like are developed? And in addition, what skill sets are underdeveloped? And just kind of holding that space, right? Not just for self reflection, but also encourage other people to reflect on that, to include your students, right? What needs exist in the classroom and the school community that would allow for such reflection to occur? In addition, interpersonal effectiveness, right? That's another competency that as leaders, it's going to allow us to better develop our skill set, right? And interpersonal effectiveness is just our ability to support others that operate in the system that we are in, right? Whether it be coworkers, whether it be supervisors, whether it be students, colleagues, no matter who it is, right? And just our ability to build, establish, maintain relationships with them, right? Creating shared visions so we can support students to achieve the highest level of success that's possible, okay? How do we create a shared vision? You guessed it, through communication, right? And we've already talked about the importance of communication. Next, communication. Okay. Our interpersonal effectiveness in creating that shared vision hinges on communication and focusing on messaging that brings positive change. Short-term struggle might be the result of communication, but if the messaging focuses on positive change in the long run, those are the types of communications that we're looking for. Not one that just throws problems out into the atmosphere for people to see and deal with, right? But something that brings about positive change. Next, and you're kind of in the middle of it right now, and you have been over the past month, but continuing education, right? This is always focusing on ways that you can better yourself. Learn for Life has kind of partnered with us to provide some of this, but I can't encourage you enough that as you start to reflect and kind of identify your effectiveness, things that you're good at, things that are maybe areas for growth, there are things that are going to work for you. We talked a little bit about learning styles, right? And us understanding our learning styles, being flexible and incorporating all of the different ones. And I want to encourage you to focus on continuing ed that isn't just suggested or mandated, but pick topics that are of interest to you that are going to allow you to add some more tools to your toolbox, right? Learning opportunities, conferences, self-directed reading. I'm big time into podcasts. I love them. I walk every day in an effort to manage my own mental health, and I found that podcasts allow me to kill two birds with one stone, right? It makes walking more manageable, but I'm also pouring into myself and sharpening some existing tools while developing some other ones. So continuing ed is really, really important. And then finally, personal effectiveness. Again, this taps into self-awareness, but know your own strengths, right? Know your own style, your interests, right? Those things that are uniquely you, and then use those to support learning, not just from students, but also self-learning, right? There are so many talents and skills and abilities you have that can be incorporated into your work with students. Maybe it even challenges them to develop some of their own. And so your own personal effectiveness should never be overlooked. One specific highlight that I have here is as you kind of entered into teaching, it's almost natural to recognize teachers that just seem to have it all together, right? And then we try to emulate their style in an effort to achieve the outcome that they achieve. But they don't achieve the outcome because of their style. They find a style that maximizes their personal effectiveness, and then they hone it and they develop it and they master it. And a style that works for one teacher is not always going to work for another one. So recognize your own personal effectiveness in ways that you can maximize that. Anybody have any comments about that? Do any of those really resonate with you as something that you find yourself naturally doing, or maybe as something that's a struggle? If not, we will transition to slide 10. So, as I talked about finding your own style, right? Knowing what it is that works for you, there are 4 specific learning styles that, again, are expanding on Michael Blos's kind of interplay, right, between rules and relationships that I really wanted to highlight. And I would guess that each of us, if we kind of think about how it is we approach certain things, are going to find that we operate primarily in one of these styles. We might vacillate from one to the other, but primarily it's going to be one of 4 styles. And so knowing the competencies of being a leader, right, is just the first half of this equation. Knowing how kind of to apply some of those principles in our work with students can also trip us up. And so these 4 primary styles I wanted to go over with y'all today. The first one is the authoritarian teacher, right? Or the authoritarian style. This is a teacher that's focused on rules and control, right? Because we need that. It's kind of this law and order environment where if the students don't conform, they're punished. Okay. This is a teacher with a highly structured environment, right? And they create the structure and they maintain the structure with students, right? Students are given few, if any, opportunities to be involved or responsive in the education process, in the establishment of rules, in changing things in the classroom that need to be changed, right? This is the authoritarian teacher. Anybody have a teacher like this? You can put a check mark, you can raise your hand, kind of use the little emoji thing, raise your hand. But can anybody relate to the authoritarian teacher? Not saying you are that teacher, but have you ever had an authoritarian teacher?
I certainly have, and I probably find myself tempted into that area.
What do you think drives that temptation? I'm really glad you brought that up, right? Because I think we all can be. What drives that temptation?
Probably fear more than anything else.
Absolutely. What do you think it's fear of?
Fear of losing control.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
And what might happen if we lose control, right?
right.
So we try to force control. And generally, as a result, we lose it, right? We lose it. But I think while you're the only one that responded, I would imagine that there are a lot of people off camera that are shaking their heads. Yep. Yep. Sometimes I can really be tempted to do that, and for the reasons that you mentioned. So that is the authoritarian teacher. Next, I want to talk about the authoritative teacher. Okay. The authoritative teacher really tries to find that balance of control and involvement, right? There are times where control might be necessary, right? Establishing the boundary or the rule, okay? But then there are other times where uh, relationships are the focus, right? Control and involvement, rules and relationship. It's a combination or an inner working or kind of a vacillation from one to the other that's seen as important. What does this look like? Well, students are encouraged to participate and collaborate, right? But to do so in a way that respects the rules. Okay. Students are given the opportunity to maybe start to go to a certain place that as a teacher can create a little bit of anxiety, right? It can get a little bit off task, but they're also given the opportunity to correct. Okay. And then finally, the authoritative teacher is flexible. And what I specifically mean by that is this is a teacher that values student input in ways that things can be made better. I can recall a teacher that I had that would ask for feedback periodically. Okay. And she would do it in a couple forms. We would have the opportunity to make comments kind of in a group setting, but then we also had the opportunity at any point to write something down on a note and put it in a box and give her feedback about something that maybe was hard for us or something that might make the class more enjoyable, more interactive, or whatever. And uh, that teacher really highlighted their focus on that mix between establishing rules, but also doing so in a way that incorporated student feedback. And she was beloved by students. And I think that one of the reasons why is because there were other teachers that weren't doing that, right? So she kind of rose above the norm because she was kind of blazing a trail and incorporating things into her teaching that others didn't think to do. So that's the authoritative teacher. Next, we have on slide 13 the permissive teacher. Okay. The permissive teacher has low levels of control and involvement, right? So let me back up. The permissive teacher has low levels of control, meaning they don't really focus on control, and they have low levels of appropriate student involvement, meaning they don't create that as the expectation. Okay. And this is kind of exemplified in a teacher that's apathetic and burned out. This is a teacher that doesn't really care about establishing anything. Okay. Students are left to do whatever they please to do. And there is no structure, there is no planning, there is not anything at all that is put in place to guide or direct them. So they're kind of left to do things at their will. Okay. Rules aren't imposed because there aren't any. Students are unengaged because the teacher isn't engaged, right? Burned out teacher on their way out. Unfortunately, we have probably been under the charge of a teacher like this as students or even as adults, right? I've had teachers in grad school that are just very uninvolved, that you almost wonder why they're teaching the class to begin with, right? But you may recognize peers that you've seen and would describe as being the permissive teacher. These are the teachers where chaos generally is the norm in their classroom. And the unfortunate outcome of this teacher is that kids end up receiving the brunt of the discipline because they are allowed to operate in an environment that's absent of structure. So this is the permissive teacher. These are the teachers that are kind of burned out. And then finally, we have the indulgent teacher. Okay. The indulgent teacher has high levels of involvement, but a complete absence of control. Okay. So we had the very strict, rigid, authoritative teacher that was all about rules and nothing about relationship. And then we have the indulgent teacher that's the exact opposite. They're all about relationship with no regard whatsoever for rules and control. Students have complete autonomy, can do whatever they want, and generally you have focus shifting pretty quickly from the academics that the teacher is there to focus on, right? And it shifts away from that, away from lesson plans to other off-task behaviors. Plans and lessons are created and attempts for instruction are made, but with an absence of any control, work is rarely accomplished. Now, kids love these teachers, but they oftentimes don't respect them. Okay. And these teachers feel like they're making progress with the students, but it's done so under the veil of indulging them in whatever it is that they want to do, and not creating structure, not creating expectations, not establishing and enforcing boundaries that help guide these kids to where they need to be academically. That is the indulgent teacher. So, does anybody have any comments whatsoever about these 4 leadership styles? I would actually love to hear, before we go to this last activity, are there places where you might find yourself leaning? Maybe 1 or 2 styles where you might say, yeah, I kind of go between this and this. Or, is there anybody that might really be in a place where they're struggling, right? They might be in a place where the kids aren't going to do work anyway, so we're just going to be indulgent, right? Or maybe work life and professional life and personal life and just the balance, it's just become overwhelming and you're burned out, feeling permissive, right? Put an X on this one if you really feel like you might be kind of leaning toward this place, right? We can certainly make it anonymous here. What about the authoritative, right, teacher, right? The one where you feel like you have a really good balance. You're focusing on relationships and rules, or maybe even the authoritarian teacher, right? One that's focused on just control and rules and that rigidity that you're going to go where you're going. But oftentimes, if you lead that way, the students aren't willing to follow, right? We can all, I think, fall into these. Good. I have a couple that are on the authoritative side. That's great. Permissive. I thank you for your honesty, right? I really do.
Can I say something?
Permissive, it's a hard place to be. Did somebody have a question?
Yeah, I just think a lot of these are well intended, right? Like, even you kind of hierarch them in a certain way where you're kind of pointing to one as the better. But I think that depending on the student's learning style too, that thinking about how students learn in different ways, that there's not one specific learning style that's really the best, even if that's how they learn, that we want this variety of things. I think that even as a teacher, we can include a variety of these styles, that we don't just have to be one and that's the only rigid way, that we're just going to always be permissive. We
Mm-hmm.
could switch between the 4, depending on what the task is that we're asking the student to do, depending on the relationship with the child, depending on how that student is really interacting with us. Maybe that student is a leader, maybe they're the ones who are really taking charge, and we can sit back and just indulge them in their learning, because they're the ones that are really in control of how well they're doing, and they're so self-motivated that we don't need to do a lot with that student. So I think that understanding these different styles, we don't have to pick one and say, this is who I am and this is what I strive to be. It's the understanding the differences, is my thought.
Correct. And I think that we can all find ourselves in one of these styles, right? Rather than focusing on a good one or a bad one, what I'm really focusing on with these 4 is that balance between rules and relationships. That's the key. Okay. Some lean more towards rules, and there might be a time where we want to be more authoritarian, where we need to focus on rules. But we have to be careful that we don't focus exclusively on rules, because then we do so at the expense of relationships, right? And so I think that sometimes over the course of a year, most definitely over the course of a career, we're going to find ourselves in one of these places, and it's not a bad thing. The key here is to be aware of what it is to be in each place, and understand that each place has an emphasis or lack thereof on rules and relationships and those connections with kids. But I hear exactly what you're saying, and I appreciate your comment there. Anybody else? Anybody else have any comments?
I think that throughout my career, I've noticed that I tend to kind of be a bit of a pendulum, and I'll find that, oh man, I really blew it over here, being too authoritarian, and then I can actually become that indulgent, and it's like, oh no, yuck, and so trying to maintain the balance is probably just a constant staying between uh, the two sides. Yeah.
Yep. And that again involves the ability for reflection and self-awareness, right? Um, I, and the flexibility really to be able to adjust based on what the students need. I think the only caution I would make when we start to look at specifically the permissive teacher, we want to permit kids to step out, right? To try to do things on their own, to make mistakes. When I look at the definition here, apathetic means the teacher doesn't care. That's what apathy means. The outcome, I don't care, right? That is what we're really want. That's a very dangerous place for us to be as educators, right? Not even focusing on the impact that it has on the students. That's a hard place to be as an educator. And my encouragement, if you're in that place for too long, is we have to start focusing on self-care, right? Ways that we can kind of be there, but recognize it, and then be able to inject some hope, some optimism, right? Some things that excite us and that motivate us, because we can get bogged down in that place pretty quickly. But I think that being raised by a teacher and then also marrying a teacher, I've seen both my mom and my wife go through various degrees of each of these. And it's not that one is bad. It's just that we don't want to stay in one too long, because it will start to have a negative impact, especially the permissive teacher as it's defined here. Okay. So the final thing that I would like to do, and rather than do it in a breakout session, there is a handout that if you will open the handout, you will see a challenge that I am presenting to y'all. Okay. Leadership competencies and how to develop them. And we talked about these leadership competencies. And so this is something that you can print out. It's a PDF. You can reference it. But I really want to challenge y'all to look at these competencies and ways that you can develop them. And so when it comes to reflection, right, we talked about the importance of reflecting and being aware of where it is that we are, what needs are existing in the classroom and the school community. And the challenge here for reflection, right, is to complete a daily journal for 2 school weeks, right? Maybe 5, or if y'all are every day, it would be, maybe 10 entries where you reflect on what the needs are that you're seeing in your classroom or in your study area or in your work group, right? What are the needs that you're seeing that your students have? What are the needs that you're seeing you might have, or just your school community in general, and kind of reflect on that, right? Daily journal entries. And these can be, it can be a 10-minute prompt, right? But just really reflecting on the various needs that might exist. Interpersonal effectiveness, right? That was the next one. And this is about supporting others, right? Including coworkers. How can I build relationships with them? How can we create shared visions? And so the challenge here is to host a brainstorming session, right? Maybe it's with a colleague, 2 or 3 colleagues. Maybe it's with a supervisor or manager. I know that your structure is a bit different, right? But host a brainstorming session that's going to allow for thoughts and ideas like to expand or grow or enhance some of the existing things that you're doing with students. Maybe it's an initiative that's new, an area of learning, or just something that deals with student support. Communication, right? And the challenge with communication as we go to this third one, identify 3 strengths or other positive attributes that you see in, I'm going to throw out the challenge as 5 colleagues, right? But just start thinking about this. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, maybe it's a colleague that you've interacted with as a result of these trainings and you have their email and you can just kind of email them about their ability to articulate certain ideas. Maybe it's their ability to express opinions that don't necessarily line up with the group consensus, right? But finding some way that you can communicate 5 attributes to a colleague, right? Or maybe leave them a thank you note, right? You never know the impact that this is going to have on someone. Continuing ed, you're in the middle of that now, but I really want to encourage you. I gave you my example of the podcast, right? But see if you can attend at least 2 trainings that deal with completely new things, or find a podcast or 2 that deals with 1 or 2 completely novel or new topics that you don't have any information about that might allow you to develop a skill set that you can apply in your work with students. And then finally, personal effectiveness, right? The personal effectiveness challenge is to complete. Maybe it's a learner profile through the Myers-Briggs or some other personality inventory that's going to give you a new, fresh awareness, right, of who it is that you are. And then maybe write a reflection on your results or share them with a loved one to see if this is a good representation of who it is that they see you to be. So as we look at these challenges, is there any one that might just jump out at anybody, right? You can kind of put an X if you want to. That's well, actually, this is a PDF, so you can't do that. But we're not on the Jamboard here. But is there any one in particular that might jump out at you? I guess you could put it on the that final slide 15 on the Jamboard about one challenge that you might be willing to take on based on the leadership styles. Anybody want to share in particular? Continuing ed, reflection, communication, anything that you feel like, yeah, I'm up to the challenge for this. Communication, awesome. And you'll see that there are little boxes next to each one that you can almost keep. This is just between you, yourself, and you, right? And just kind of keep that as a little accountability sheet, right? Where you can kind of look at some examples of ways that you can continue to develop some of those leadership competencies that are really good for us all to revisit from time to time. And I think that each of us, as we really begin to develop those competencies, will find that it's going to make us more effective teachers and more effective leaders in the classroom. So y'all have been awesome. I want to kind of take a minute to see if anybody has any other questions or comments. I appreciate those of you that have provided comments, whether it's through interacting with the Jamboard, unmuting, typing in the chat. I really appreciate the interaction and the feedback, and not just through this training. It allows me to focus on some things as well that maybe I can highlight, look a bit more into, or certainly identify it as an area of growth for me when it comes to this content. So I just want to thank y'all again for being here. It's good to see familiar faces and names, and I hope that y'all have a beautiful rest of your Monday and a beautiful week, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks. Y'all take care.